Ever get that feeling? Like you're going through your day, everything seems normal, and then bam, something happens. And it's like the world cracks open and you see how fragile it all really is.
Oh, absolutely. Like the rug's been pulled out from under you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're looking at today. You sent us this piece, L'Ambasciatore del Tenebra. It's from November 2023 by Daniele Salvato.
Right.
And what really grabbed us about this story is that it just pulls you in. You know, there's this incredible momentum, but then it leaves you hanging like right on the edge of a cliff, and you have no idea what's going to happen next. You were drawn to this story because it's about an ordinary guy, right? Someone just like us. And then suddenly he's thrust into this increasingly strange and dangerous situation.
Exactly. It's so unsettling how quickly his familiar world just sort of dissolves into something really bizarre and dangerous.
Yeah. Makes you think, doesn't it? About our own lives and how quickly things could change. Okay, so let's dive in. We're introduced to this character, Den. He's in a tavern, and it seems like the beat's winding down.
Right.
And you get the sense that he's just going through the motions. You know, he talks about cleaning up these lost souls, which, I mean, that's a pretty bleak way to look at things, isn't it?
Yeah, a bit jaded, maybe.
Definitely. And all he seems to want is to get out of there, just to breathe some fresh air, escape the stuffiness of the tavern.
Escape the routine.
Exactly. And even in these early scenes, you get a strong sense of his environment, this place, Tilkedem. It's a society trapped in this brutal cycle. The text really lays it out. New ruler, new conflict.
New conflict, more poverty, more poverty. Well, guess what? More conflict. And the reasons for these wars, they shift. You know, one time it's access to the sea. Next time it's religious differences. But it's the same pattern over and over again. Perpetual war.
It's like they haven't learned anything from the past. They're repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah.
Over and over again. It's tragic, isn't it? And this time, the call to arms is about honor. Defending their honor against not one, not two, but three enemies.
Wow.
Yeah. And despite, Den's obvious lack of enthusiasm for all this patriotic talk, he gets swept up in the mobilization. Like, one minute he's in the tavern, the next he's in the central square with all these other young recruits. And there's this moment, this really telling moment, where an older soldier just casually remarks that they're finally getting rid of a burden.
Oh, that's harsh.
And he says it loud enough for everyone to hear. It just sets this really stark tone about how these young lives are viewed. They're disposable.
It's like they're not even people to him, just obstacles.
Right. And what's interesting is that right next to Den, there's this other young recruit. And this guy is like the opposite. He's full of this naive nationalism. You can practically feel his excitement. He can't wait to go fight for his country.
It's like he's been brainwashed.
Yeah. And it makes you realize how easy it is for the army to get new recruits. They just tap into this ingrained patriotism, this almost blind faith in their country's cause.
Right. It's a powerful tool, that kind of blind faith.
Definitely. And then we see them being transported to the barracks. They're crammed into this cart. And it's almost comical. These young guys all puffed up, boasting about their skills and their past kills, which I'm sure are mostly made up.
Yeah, I bet. They're all trying to one-up each other, full of bravado, but none of them really know what they're getting into.
Right. It's all fun and games until the reality of war hits.
Exactly. And it's a classic example of how societies romanticize war, especially for those who haven't experienced it firsthand.
And then the narrative shifts. It paints this really sharp contrast between this common city and the Tilkedem of power, like the ruling class. We're told about these luxurious palaces, hidden behind not one, but two sets of walls. That's where King Percival and his court live.
Wow, two sets of walls.
Yeah. And the royal palace is described as impregnable, like this fortress perched high up on the hill, while the barracks are like halfway up.
So they're literally looking up at the people in power.
Exactly. It's a really powerful image of the social hierarchy, this gap between those who rule and those who are sent to fight.
And it makes you think, are those in power even aware of the sacrifices these young men are about to make?
Yeah. And Den, he's watching all this, and he sees right through it. He calls these eager young recruits cannon fodder.
It's sad, but he's probably right.
Yeah. And he's not exactly optimistic about his own chances either. Like, his motivation for fighting, it's not glory, it's not honor, it's just to survive.
Just to live another day.
Exactly. It's a pretty stark contrast to all the patriotic talk we've been hearing.
Yeah. It's a reminder that in the end, it's all about survival.
And then everything changes. Den's kind of zoning out, just staring at the drainage ditch beside the road when he hears this thud near the cart. and it snaps him back to reality.
Like a jolt.
And what's interesting is that he seems to be the only one who noticed it. All the other recruits are still lost in their war fantasies.
So he's already more aware of his surroundings, maybe more cautious than the others.
Yeah, maybe. And then he sees this glint in the distance. He thinks it might be armor, but then he realizes it's something else. It's this formation of birds overhead. But they're not like any birds he's seen before.
Strange birds.
Yeah, too small to be pigeons, too big to be swallows. And they're moving in this really strange, deliberate way, like they're on a mission.
It's creepy.
And then it hits them. The birds, they're not birds, they're arrows. And they're heading straight for the cart.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's pure chaos. Den throws himself to the ground, and he ends up landing face first in the boots of one of the other recruits. The two soldiers who are with them, they're killed instantly. Some of the recruits, they manage to draw their swords, jump off the cart. But they don't last long.
They're completely outmatched.
Yeah. And Den, he just wipes blood from his face. Beside him, there's this young recruit, Retroclus. He's been hit in the shoulder, and he's screaming for help. And two other guys, they try to get to the horses pulling the cart, but one of the horses is already dead, and the other is just freaking out, kicking and bucking.
So there's no escape.
No. And suddenly, Den realizes he's alone.
Yeah.
He's terrified, but there's also this weird sense of relief, like he can't believe he's still alive.
Yeah.
But then he hears the sound of armed men coming from the woods, and this guttural shout like a victory cry.
So the danger's not over.
Definitely not. And he has all these questions. Who are these attackers? Are they the Nazgûl, the ones everyone fears? And how do they get so close to the city without being detected?
Yeah, good question.
And in that moment, he just acts. Pure instinct. He slips off the cart, crawls to the edge of the road, and disappears into this wheat field.
He's running for his life.
Yeah. And as he's running, he hears the cries of Retroclus, the wounded recruit. Stop. He assumes the worst.
It's a grim realization.
Yeah. He keeps running, and eventually comes to the end of the field. He's back on the road.
The road that was supposed to lead him to the barracks.
Right. And he knows he has to get to the city to warn everyone.
So he's not just running anymore. He's got a purpose.
Yeah, even if it's not one he asked for. He starts running towards Tilkedem, and just as he reaches the first houses on the outskirts, the city alarm goes off. It's this piercing wail that just stops him dead in his tracks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there are these women. They were hanging laundry in their yards, and they're all startled by the alarm. Den, he rushes towards one of them, waving his arms frantically. Alarm! Alarm! He shouts. The Nazgûrs are attacking!
He's trying to warn them.
But they just look at him with suspicion. More women gather around, and Den tries to explain, he says he just escaped this attack near the barracks. He's desperate for them to believe him.
But they don't.
No. One of the older women, she just dismisses him with a wave of her hand, like he's a nuisance. And another woman, she starts scolding him for playing what she thinks is a childish prank. She even boasts about her own son, who's serving in the Royal Guard.
So they're in denial. They can't even imagine that an attack is possible.
I think he's lying, trying to avoid being conscripted.
It's like they're blinded by their patriotism.
Yeah. And they start closing in on him. Like they're going to grab him, make him do his duty as they see it.
That's terrifying.
He manages to break free and run. He could hear them shouting, trying to get someone to stop him. But no one does. And he's just grateful for the apathy, the same apathy that, he probably complained about before.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It is. And now he's thinking, okay, who can I warn? Who will actually believe me? And he decides to try Sadwaz, the blacksmith. He figures Sadwaz is a practical guy. Maybe he'll listen.
Maybe.
So he runs to the square, and there's this statue there dedicated to peace. It was kind of ironic concerning what's happening. He turns down the street where Sadwaz's workshop is. And then he stops dead in his tracks. Because Sadwaz is doing something completely unexpected.
What's he doing?
Well, Den was expecting disbelief, right? Anger, maybe. But Sadwaz starts crying. And he says in this voice that's just full of certainty, Tilkedem has already fallen.
Whoa.
Yeah. And Den is just stunned. He can't process it. I mean, he just witnessed this attack.
Yeah.
But to hear Sadwaz say it with such conviction, it's like it's already a fact. Like it's inevitable.
It's like he knows something Den doesn't.
Yeah. And then Sadwaz says something even stranger. He says that they don't know each other. Not really. But that he's been waiting for Den. He didn't know what he looked like or when he would arrive, but he knew it would happen.
That's cryptic.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then he starts backing away. He's scared now. This isn't what he expected at all. He came seeking help, and now he feels trapped.
Like he stumbled into something way over his head.
Yeah, and Sadwaz, he senses Den's fear. He tries to reassure him, but it comes out all wrong.
Not very comforting.
Not at all. And then Sadwaz gives Den a choice. He says he can either run and try to warn others, who will probably think he's crazy, or he can stay and listen to what Sadwaz knows about him, about Den himself.
It's a tough choice.
It is. And Den, he's tempted to run. He looks at the square, and it's full of people just going about their day. No one seems to have a clue what's coming.
So he's caught between these two realities, the reality of the attack and the ignorance of the people in the city.
Yeah, he's really struggling. And then Sadwaz, his name's actually Zelmar, he leads Dan down this narrow, dark corridor. It smells terrible, like damp earth and something worse.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah, they come to this small room, and it's a mess. Tools everywhere, random stuff piled up. Zelmar apologizes for his memory, says it's not what it used to be. Den finds a barrel to sit on. Not the most comfortable, but it'll do. He's still scared, but now there's this curiosity, too. He wants to know what Zelmar has to say.
He wants answers.
Definitely. Zelmar pours him some cider from this cracked mug, and he starts pacing around this large figure that's covered in cloth. He keeps glancing at it like he admires it. And then he starts talking. He says, as you well know, the Tilcadians are a warlike people. Courageous. He pauses for a moment. Some might even say glorious. Another pause. Or perhaps others, with a less romantic view, might describe them as reckless, undeniably bold, and decidedly warmongering.
So he's painting a picture of Tilkadim, and it's not necessarily a flattering one.
No. And he keeps going, talking about how war is like their solution to everything, how they're born with a sword in their hand. And then he looks at Den and says, but you, of course, already know this.
Kind of condescending, isn't it?
Yeah. And Den is getting annoyed. He's like, yeah, get to the point. But then Zelmar says, what you don't know, and what only I, it seems, now truly remember, is that in the distant past, a past so far removed that no tangible trace of it now remains, a past that has been deliberately, meticulously erased from the annals of our history. The Tilcadians were, in fact, the precise opposite of what they are today.
He's talking about a forgotten past, a time when Tilkadim was peaceful.
Exactly. He says they were humble, hardworking people. They found joy in simple things. They were content.
It's hard to believe, isn't it, considering what they're like now?
It is. And then Zelmar gets to how things started to change. He says that back then, there were no kings who inherited the throne. Any Tilcadian with enough wisdom, experience, and charisma could run for, wait for it, election.
Election in Tilkadim.
Yeah, I know, right? And then he freaks out. He's like, elections? What are you talking about? I've never heard of such a thing.
Right.
He thinks Zelmar is losing it, making stuff up.
I mean, it does sound pretty crazy.
It does. And then he tries to leave. He wants out of this weird situation. But just as he's reaching the door, he hears these horrible screams coming from outside. Women, children.
Yeah.
It's pure chaos.
The Nazgûl.
Yeah. And Zelmar, he just calmly says, it seems the Nazgûrs have arrived. And then he looks at Den and asks, do you believe me now?
So he was right all along.
Yeah. And Den, he's still scared, but now he's also intrigued. He decides to stay and hear what else Zelmar has to say.
He has to know more.
Zelmar acknowledges Den's fear, but he says that the truth, even when it's hard to swallow, is still the truth. And then he drops a bombshell. He says he should be dead, that he's much older than any human should be, but he's still alive for a reason.
He's clinging to life for a reason?
Yeah. He's been trying to warn people about the danger for centuries, but no one listened. He can't fight, not anymore. But he has another way to potentially save Tilkadim, and for that he needs Den's help.
He needs Den's help.
Yeah. And Den, he's like, help? What are you talking about? You said you'd tell me about me, not ask me to help you.
Yeah.
He's freaking out again. He lists all the reasons why he's the wrong guy for this, how he just wants a quiet life, how he ran from the attack.
Understandable reaction.
Totally.
Yeah.
Zelmar just keeps going like he didn't even hear Den. He starts talking about this king, Old Godin. He came to power about 1,000 years ago.
So this is going way back.
Way back. And he describes Ulgadin as this really ambitious merchant, always wanting more wealth, more power. But in his early years, he at least pretended to respect the Tilcadians' peaceful values.
So he was hiding his true nature.
Yeah. But deep down, he craved something more. And he decided to run for king.
He ran for king.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because he was rich and well-connected, he won. No surprise there. People loved him. He was always giving money away, helping those in need.
So he was playing the part of a benevolent ruler.
Exactly. And Zelmar reminds Den that back then, Tilkedim was just this small, neutral city-state. They stayed out of the wars that were happening around them. The Nasquar Empire, they were the big power in the region. No one could challenge them, at least not without some serious alliances.
So Tilkedim was safe, but Ulgaden wanted more.
He did. And he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed the Tilkadians to go to war. But how do you convince a peaceful people to embrace violence?
It seems impossible.
It does. And that's when things take a dark turn. Zelmar says that all that unchecked ambition, all that desire for power, it acted like a beacon. And it attracted the attention of true evil.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Tilkedim, they had managed to avoid this kind of darkness for so long. But it was about to change.
And how did this evil manifest itself?
Well, Zelmar says that evil can take many forms. It can be a spirit, a voice in your head, even an obstacle in your path. But in this case, it arrived in Tilkedim in the form of an ambassador.
An ambassador.
Yeah, from this distant land. And Zelmar doesn't even remember the name of this land anymore.
It's been lost to time.
And he describes this ambassador, Palanikios, as this really elegant, charming guy. Very smart, well-spoken.
Sounds harmless enough.
Right. But Zelmar says he felt this immediate suspicion like something was deeply wrong with this guy. But he didn't know what to do about it. And he wasn't the only one keeping an eye on things. There were these others, called soul investigators.
Soul investigators.
They had this special ability to probe people's minds, look for any signs of evil intentions.
So they were like mind police.
Kind of. They were supposed to protect Tilkedim's ethical code.
Fascinating.
And Din, he's actually caught up in the story now, he asks Zelmar, if these soul investigators could read minds, why didn't they stop Ulgaden?
Good question.
Zelmar explains that Ulgaden, even though he was consumed by ambition, he was also trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
He was suppressing his desires, which created this mental fog that the soul investigators couldn't see through.
So he was basically blocking their powers.
Yeah. And then there's Palanikios, the ambassador. He's getting closer to Ulgaden, whispering in his ear. And Zelmar and the other soul investigators, they try to probe his mind, figure out what he's up to, but they can't. They get lost in this endless labyrinth of thoughts.
Sounds frustrating.
It was. And then finally, they get a glimpse of Palanikios' true nature. And it's horrifying.
What do they see?
They see Ulgaden making a pact with Palanikios. And Palanikios, he's not human. He's a demon. A demon.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And this pact, it's all about power. Ulgaden will get 1,000 years of glory. His name will be remembered forever. But the price is Tilkedim itself. At the end of those 1,000 years, the city will be enslaved to the Jinn. They'll suffer for eternity.
It's a terrible bargain.
And Ulgaden, he doesn't hesitate. He's so blinded by ambition that he doesn't even think about the consequences.
It's tragic.
And then, before the Jinn can fully take over, Ulgaden asks for one more favor. He wants the soul investigators gone. He knows they know the truth.
So he betrays them.
Yeah. The Jinn attacks their minds, floods them with these horrible images of pain and suffering. Two of them, Kamoses and Penetier, they die instantly. But Zelmar, he's younger, stronger. He manages to survive by slipping into a coma.
Yeah.
The Jinn thinks he's dead.
Wow.
And when he wakes up, Tilkedim is completely different. It's a war machine now. Everyone is consumed by this thirst for conquest.
The Jinn's influence.
Exactly. And Zelmar, he's an outcast now. He tries to connect with people, but he can't. Their minds are all clouded, corrupted.
So he's completely alone?
And then he looks at Den and says, "That's my story. What's yours?"
Wow. What a story.
Den's just overwhelmed by all of this. He asks Zelmar what he's supposed to do. Like, should he go fight the Nasquar? And he's like, because I'm not a hero, Zelmar. I'm just a regular guy. And he reminds Zelmar of everything. How he wanted to quit his job, how he ran from the attack. He's not brave. He's not strong. He's not a leader.
He's just trying to survive.
Exactly. And Zelmar, he listens patiently. And then he says, I understand. But then he adds, but all those choices you made, Den, they led you here to this moment.
It's like he's saying that Den's ordinary life is actually what makes him special.
Yeah. And then he explains why he's still alive. He says he's been preserving himself for this moment, for Den, because the Jinn, he can't be killed by magic alone.
There has to be another way.
There is. Zelmar says there's this artifact, this incredibly powerful object that the Jinn created, but it's broken into two pieces. One is in this place called Laxold, and the other is with the Jinn himself.
So they need to find this other piece.
Yeah. And reunite them. That will weaken the Jinn. And Zelmar says he can't do it himself. He's too old, too weak, and whoever goes after this artifact, they have to be immune to the Jinn's magic.
And who is immune?
Den.
Den.
Yeah, because he's ordinary. He has no grand ambitions, no burning desires for power or glory, so the djinn can't touch him.
That's incredible.
And that's why Zelmar told him this whole story. He needs Den to go to Laxailed and find that other piece of the artifact.
So he's sending Den on a quest.
He is. And just as Den is about to protest, they hear this huge crash. It's the Nazgûl breaking down the door.
They're trapped.
Zelmar pulls back the cloth, covering that figure in the corner, and it's a flying boat. It's small, and it's powered by these big balloons.
What a flying boat.
Yeah. And he shoves this map into Den's hands, and he's like, go to Mekalabar, don't talk to anyone, go 1 kilometer from the city, then head northeast to the Stony Hills. There's a cave shaped like a lion. Say these words. Marvin, it is time to pay your debt.
Marvin! Who's Marvin?
Din's wondering the same thing. He thinks Zelmar is crazy. But there's no time. The door is about to break down. Zelmar pushes Den towards the boat. Trust me, he says. You'll find help in Mekalabar.
He's sending him off with a lot of faith.
And a lot of mystery. Zelmar pulls a rope, and this section of the roof opens up.
An escape route.
Tim's like, come with me. But Zelmar refuses. My path ends here, he says. Yours is just beginning.
He's sacrificing himself.
And then he pushes Den into the boat. The balloons lift off, and they're rising towards the open roof just as the Nazgûl burst into the workshop.
It's a narrow escape.
And then a torch lights up the room. Den looks down, and he sees Zelmar get crushed by falling debris.
Oh my God.
The boat keeps rising, escapes through the roof.
So he made it out.
For now.
Phew.
The boat's swaying. Den has no idea how to control it. And then he sees a rock wall looming ahead.
He's heading for a crash.
Yeah. And that's where the story ends. For now.
It's a cliffhanger.
Huge one.
So what do you think happens next?
I have no idea. But I guess we'll have to wait for the next installment to find out.
I can't wait.